So this is the new version of SimpleMixer. There's some big UI updates to allow it to work with 4K and be stretchable, and it also allows us to do Midi learning. So if I go into learn mode, I can now set and learn different MIDI, OSC, whichever device I have. I can hook that up, and so for example keyboard, I can left click on an object and I can map it, and I can right click to remove the mapping. So if I set up 1, 2, 3, I can turn off learn mode, and then I can type 1, 2, 3 to switch through those different menus. I can then go into settings, and if I want, I can clear all mappings, will clear all of my MIDI controls. So now when I hit 1, 2, 3, it won't do anything. There's also, because it works at 4K, I didn't quite figure out the font scaling stuff, so I've just had a font size, so you can change that to something that makes sense. I actually do know how to fix that now, but that'll wait for the next version before I do anything. There's also this color slider for sliding around and changing the color of the UI. If you want to set up devices, there's these different tabs here which you can turn on and off, and these allow you to set up UDP, ArtNet, MIDI and OSC, and they're all pretty self-explanatory. It's all the standard parameters you would see in an OSC and chop, for example. There's also a save button now. There's some tap BPM stuff, which might have been in the old version, but I can't remember. But now you can tap here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and that will set the BPM. And then you can sort of minus the BPM down to something or plus it to come back up. So that's basically the new features. The mapping screen is still there. Show is the same. Movies have had some bug fixes where they weren't working, so now they all work fine. So if you go in, that will load up. Post effects are pretty much the same as well. Not much has changed there, so I just deassign that post effect. And toxes are still the same old kind of not so good. This is a new one here, which was kindly donated. So this is an instances set up from Michel Didier. JetXS, if on the forums, made this one. I assume it's Michael. I probably got that wrong. Never mind. He can correct me later. And yeah, so he has a little effect he's put on here, which is quite cool. It's got some sphere instancing going on. So that's one new effect that will be going into the SimpleMixer library repository. And these will probably all disappear because they're a bit rubbish and be replaced with a new set, which I'm working on. So I'm going to go over the first visual. The first tox from the new set of sample toxes that are going to go in. And I'll start off by explaining, so it's an instancing setup, and if I turn off the effects for now, it's so it's an archable camera, and you can spin it around and stuff by just clicking and dragging, which is fun. So you can have it kind of always, rotating just from the click drag. And it has a template which you copy instances onto, and it's all done in PBR stuff, so it's got an environment map around that. So if I set up, for example, a cube grid, so I can set up a cube grid, and then I can choose the size of the template. I can choose the divisions, so we can see there we're copying onto that cube grid. It could also be a sphere, so we can copy onto that sphere. Or it could be a grid, which for some reason is always very small, or it could be a particle system. And the particle system has its parameters here, so like turbulence, we can drag those up, and we can create kind of crazy shapes from that. And we also have some instance point sorting. I'll go over point sorting in a moment after I've gone through the shape material. So if I go into cube grid mode, zoom in a bit, or maybe make it bigger, whichever. I can then go into the instance shape and material. So on this tab we can set the actual shape of the object being copied. At the moment the sizing is obviously a bit weird because it's not equal, so if I just set that to be, so I can have lots of spheres all at 0.01, or I could have lots of cubes, and that is very small. and those cubes could be rotated to vector, but let me make them a bit bigger so we can see. There we go. So if we have lots of cubes, we could, for example, rotate to vector. This will then rotate them to whatever the vector of the template is. So that's quite fun. We can then change the material. So if we want, we can have them kind of matte, or we can have them super shiny with the environment map on top. At the moment, there's only one environment map, which is the standard Touch Designer. It's that picture from the map folder of the, I don't know, it looks like a sort of temple in Istanbul or something. I'm not sure where it is. And you can, so at the moment it's only that one, but yeah, you can sort of change the material around, and you can see that these cubes, by default, they have a bit of curvature on them. That's just so they look a bit nicer and shinier. And they also have a bit of texture, and that texture is defined by this instance bump texture. So we have noise, which is just noise, which allows us to change the amplitude, the period, and the exponents, just those parameters. So we can kind of make weird shapes with that. And we have a tech grid, which is just a texture that kind of looks like, you know, if you wanted to make it look like some kind of beeple thing with, you know, weird, you know, the look I'm going for. You can make it look like that. And there's a grunge texture, which is just a sort of standard grunge. And the amplitude works on that, but the period and the exponents only work on the noise type. So if I set that to tech grid, and I'm going to rotate to vector, why not? And so we've got our shiny object. So we can then go to the effector page. So effectors, the effector it has a couple of things. One is that it can go in z-axis only. This is really for when you're copying to a grid. It's not so useful if you're copying to a cube or a sphere or a particle system. And we can set that so, okay, so it's gonna, you know, it can be a constant. So if I just show the effector curve, you can see here we have a constant, and this is the scale as we go from the 0.0 all the way up to whatever, 5,000, whatever it might be. So we can scale up, we can change the amplitude of that. We can change things like the decay rate, the ramp slope, so you can kind of make things, you know, die off faster or slower. And this is affected, this is mainly done through the point ID. So the point ID is defined by the template shape. So if I go to the template shape and set this to something like proximity to point. So now you can see that the cubes on the outside are smaller than the cubes on the inside. And the reason for that is that this proximity point, the point is 0, 0, 0, so it's gonna, if I set this to 10, then it's actually gonna be from this side to this side, for example. It's proximity to that point. So I've just sort of set that to the, that's a sort SOP basically, just setting that in the back end. And so in the effector, yeah, you've got things like, so at the moment on a constant effector, so it's just going to kind of go down depending on a constant sort of linear curve. Well, not curve, is the point. So we can set it to sine wave, which is a bit more fun. We can set the period to something, so it's like kind of got ripples. We could change the phase, which will obviously change how the cubes are changing there. I could get rid of this ramp slope, and then maybe kind of, you know, have our amplitude brought up quite a bit. And then if I set the period, the phase to something like, I don't know, me.time.ab seconds, then you can see there we start to get this sine wave moving through the sphere object. Well, the cube copied object. So that is sort of how you get animation out of it. And also you can decay rate. So if I decay it off, you can see there it's kind of doing this interesting cube thing. And I can actually reverse the point order, or rather turn off reversing the point order. And this will allow us to create sort of shapes across. And obviously if that's a sphere, we can get different looks depending on what we're using. Tubes are quite fun because with tubes, if I use a tube, set the amplitude, one moment, wrong page, set the amplitude to something quite big, decay rate to, in fact I might just set it to a constant, again. So on my tube here, I can, if I copy the tube to a sphere, and then I set the size, so I can make it so the tube's like a spike, so I can set this to like 1. And now we get like a sort of spiky thing. Maybe this is like 0.01, I don't know, round it off a bit. So now we've got like some kind of spiky tube thing. Obviously toruses will work with that as well, so I set this like 0.1, this is 0.01, and we'll get like kind of rings of toruses there. And so that's like kind of all good and wonderful for the effector stuff. We also have lighting. Lighting's kind of useful. It's probably more useful when you have a material that's more sort of matte. So if I have a matte material, and actually if I go back to maybe cubes, maybe I just need to set this to 0.1 each. Maybe 0.1 there as well. And then maybe I'll just bring my template down a bit and then zoom in. So here we have a load of sort of cubes copied across this little cube grid. And actually it would be nice if they were a little bit bigger than that. 0.5. There we go. So we've got like cubes copied across here, and you can see there's this kind of weird color. The reason it's that weird color is because obviously that environment map is affecting. So we can in lighting turn off the environment map. Or we can just leave it on and we can go into effects and turn off the saturation, and the value could maybe come down a bit as well because it's a bit crazy. Maybe set it to like 2. So yeah, so we got in here in lighting we can obviously turn shadows on. This will turn on. It's a bit hard to see right now unless I do something a bit crazier with my thingy. So I'll go 1, maybe like 5. Alright, cool. So you can see the shadows in there starting to sort of create those shadows across that. What's probably better for that is actually screen space ambient occlusion. So now I've got that on. Obviously it's really heavy, so we want to go to like, I don't know, quarter res. Maybe bring the radius down a bit so it's not so crazy. Contrast can come up a bit. There we go. So we can have like ambient occlusion in there, which is good fun. And then the lighting can kind of play with that as well. And we can change our light colors. Annoyingly, it's through the touch interface, so it's flashing at me, but that's a bit annoying. That's something that needs to be sort of addressed as well. So yes, we have that's like the lighting stuff, so you can just kind of add lights to it. You can then go in, and if I put it into like, I don't know, sphere mode, ooh, crazy spheres. So there's like another fun shape. I could go into like effects and say, we could say show environment map. We'll show the environment map around it. We can enable depth of field. Is quite fun. So depth of field we can set the limits of. So I can say actually from 5 to maybe 10. I want the depth of field to kick in. I want the depth of field to be either very weak or very strong. So you can do that, which gives a sort of fake depth. We can actually add a color back in. We can change the hue, so we can have it like kind of different color. And yeah, so we can kind of do things with matte colors as well. In fact, actually, the torus sometimes looks quite nice. Let me just get rid of tech grid because it's annoying. Toruses can sometimes look quite nice when they're instanced onto spheres without a massive size, like 0.01, something like that. Yeah, so you can create like kind of cool looking torus stuff with that, or you can use tubes and have tubes sort of spiky, very furry spiky sort of tubes, maybe 0.1. Yeah, so you can do like kind of crazy, maybe like 2 on that, make it a bit less. And if I turn off my SSAO, it's probably going to look, or maybe just adjust it so the contrast's a bit lower. Radius down, contrast up is always fun. Yeah, so I can do like, you know, crazy sort of fur kind of looking thing with that. And then the effector can also choose sort of how that tube animates on or off, so it can kind of, you know, pulsate and stuff, which is quite nice as well. And obviously that tube could just be 0.1, it could just be exactly that, a tube which was sort of, you know, used as rings, so I could say like 0.2, 0.2, you know, something like that. You can kind of create effects from that as well. So yeah, so that's kind of how this effector works. You can create, you know, these shapes. and sort of play around, and it's quite easy to get a lot of different sort of sizes and things like that out of it. If I just do 111 on that, and you can turn on the SSAO, you can have them super shiny, PBR looking, crazy things, so that this is like, really shiny thing. If I just put it onto a sphere there, you can sort of then, set those textures up. You can add more textures in. Obviously this is just a menu, so you can just add a texture in and add another menu item in, and that'll work. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So yeah, have fun playing around with it, and it'll be interesting to see what people come up with. And obviously this, because it's in touch, because it's in as a post effect, so there's particles sort of doing crazy stuff. Because it's a post effect, we can obviously then go into our because it's a tox, sorry, it's SimpleMixer, we can then go in and obviously add post effects straight into that system. So I can create intensity, kind of zoom in. Oh, I would zoom in, but I'm in the wrong. There's also, you can also now right click on these to sort of switch that effect. So I can go in and maybe, zoom in on that crazy particle system, and then bring that kind of amplitude down or something. The decay rate might come down, the amplitude might come up. Yeah, something like that's quite cool. And then you can obviously bring in like bananagram works perfectly fine with, helps if I turn it off and on again. Yeah, bananagram works really well with it, and so on as well. So yeah, it's kind of fun for creating that effect. So that's the first of a lot of effects I want to make in Touch. So that's sort of the first sort of hurdle. So next ones will be, I want to have like a graphical line based one, maybe like a Plexus style plugin. This one's kind of obviously a bit more graphy, sort of like, instancing across lots of cubes and circles and stuff. I would also like to do one that's all about sort of noise and sine waves and things like that. So there's a few different styles that I'm going for. And then I think on top of that, it would be nice to have some more post effects which are like lighting based and so on. So I'm starting to look more at the creative side of template assets in SimpleMixer rather than the other assets. And obviously I can add in the other stuff, this other instancing stuff as well. So yeah, so I think that's probably it for now. If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask, because I'll be answering those. Again, it's still better to be on 1080p, annoyingly, because of this system. Once we get rid of this and replace it with MIDI mappable stuff, like auto-generating MIDI mappable stuff, it'll be a lot better. But that's not going to come until probably the next Touch Designer release, or maybe by the end of the year if we're lucky. I don't really know. But yeah, enjoy.